All right, thanks for those that have joined right now. We're going to get started in just about 60 seconds, letting everyone come in, and we'll kick things off here shortly.
I'm excited, guys.
Me too.
Good. All right, we're at the 12:01 mark, so we'll go ahead and kick things off. So looking forward, we've got a great webinar ahead of us. Just a few things before I turn it over to Greg and Peter here. Please add your comments and engagements in the chat option below. We're looking forward to seeing all those. And then if you have questions for Greg or Peter throughout, please add those into the Q&A section. We'll be moderating that going forward. So without further ado, Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Matt. And thanks to Peter for joining us today. I'm really excited about this conversation. There's so much to dig into, and this is the right guy to do it with. So what I actually like to do is let you introduce yourself, Peter. I think that would be the most interesting and personal way for those who don't know you to kind of get to know you a little bit. So why don't we start with that?
Yeah, is it okay if I share a little slide? I have a Meet Pete slide that might be...
Heck yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm the founder and CEO of GUIDEcx. They say the best products in the world are built from the founder's greatest frustrations. And one of my biggest frustrations was not being kept on the same page after I bought a product or service, not just in SaaS, but like even going through like the home loan process, not being updated from my broker on whether or not like an appraisal has happened or it's not, or an inspection has occurred. I think all throughout our lives, like the expectations of a modern day customer are shaped by B2C or business to consumer companies like Amazon. Like they let me know when my package is late because Jeff Bezos tells me it's late through an Amazon package tracker. So like the modern day expectations that we have are leveled up in such a way that it makes it hard for companies to meet those expectations set by these just amazing companies in the B2C space. So that's the problem I set out to solve. I'm a father of 4 girls. My oldest is 11, my youngest is 4. I have 4 weddings to pay for, so wish me luck. Yeah, 1 of 5 boys. So 4 girls is really new to me. I grew up, building homes, framing houses in the summers with my dad. He was a home builder. He was an entrepreneur. I saw him succeed and fail. And what I really, learned from him is his demeanor didn't change. He was a great father all along, even through the failures. And he taught me that failure was temporary. The lesson is often learned after the challenge. So yeah, grateful to be here, Greg.
So awesome. What a great intro. I'm not surprised. I didn't know, but I'm not surprised you have a building background, because watching you do what you do, you're a builder. Yeah. Everything's about, well, we can build a solution for that. We can build on that. I want to add to your dad's statement, failure is temporary unless you make it permanent. And I think that's pretty profound, actually. In a way, it relates actually to what we're going to be talking about, because when I think about customer retention, right, in a way, it's kind of funny the way we talk about retention, because the word retention or renewal, that's the outcome we're looking for. That's what we want, right? But that's not what the customer wants, right? And so, here's this relationship in which we each want something, totally fair, but there's a sense in which the thing they want is ultimately the most important thing we need to make sure happens, or they won't give us the thing we want. And I think it's worth just kind of getting back to that bedrock a little bit. But today we're going to talk about it in the context of onboarding, which is very relevant to you and your company and what you guys do, which I want to get to as well, because it's relevant to the substance of what we're going to dig into today, which is what's going on with onboarding and what's the connection between onboarding and customer retention success, right? Yeah. So I couldn't think of anyone I'd rather talk about that with than you. And I have a lot to say about it, and I know you have even more. So this is going to be really, really fun. So
well, right back
so
at you.
maybe
It's humbling to be on the line with you. And I've read the study you just published, just some enormous and incredible learnings that came from that. And you're absolutely right. Like the job of not only an onboarding manager, but a customer success manager is to realize the hopes and dreams of your customers. And if you do that, everything will work out. Like in parenting, a common adage I often hear that I really love and respect is, when your love works, everything else works. And that's that can be applied to our customers, right? That we show that we love them and care for them when we know and understand them. And knowing and understanding them is realizing like what their hopes and dreams are. We have to know those. And if we can, follow through on those hopes and dreams, and the hopes and dreams might be specific to the individual and not the company. Like the individual might be, gunning for a promotion, and it's up to you to know that, so that you can help them get that promotion. That's like one of the, 3 or 4 occurrences I've had in the last, couple months is hearing about those instances where GUIDEcx, I can't take full credit for it, but like it's come across the wire saying, hey, because of GUIDEcx, I got a promotion. Like that's awesome. And you're retaining not only that company for life, but that user for life. So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, which could turn into more companies. No, it's perfect.
Yeah.
I like the idea of hopes and dreams because it gets us back to what are they trying to achieve, right? Because one thing we know, and I've shared this with you, many of you have heard it, but it's worth it as another jumping off point, which is that the research increasingly consistently demonstrates that what we thought was the fundamental basis of our relationship was whether customers were satisfied or happy with the experience, turns out to not be relevant for long-term retention.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, right? Because we had hoped, I had for many years, that it was roughly a proxy for the thing they were trying to achieve, but it's not. It's another thing. It's a valid thing, but it's not relevant for the long-term retention, which means it's something more like hopes and dreams. It's something more like, what are they trying to achieve? What's their outcome? What are they trying to get to, right? And so that's interesting because that's relevant to the topic, onboarding, right? Because, okay, why do we even have onboarding? Like, what's the purpose of onboarding? There are companies that don't do onboarding. There are companies that give you the option of as a customer, whether to do onboarding, right? Yeah. So it's not a given. It's like it wasn't decreed in stone tablets that we would have onboarding, right? It was created for a purpose. So talk to me a little bit about kind of what's that bigger picture and how does that connect maybe into some of the things that get very specific we'll talk about.
Yeah, the first analogy that comes to mind that we often share in our company is a quote from Frederick Wallace Smith, who is the CEO of FedEx. So this is the first like unicorn in the United States. FedEx was. They were competing with the United States Postal Service that arguably had like an unlimited amount of funds available to them to compete with any service, right? They're a government-backed entity. You could probably argue that they don't have unlimited funds anymore, but Frederick Wallace Smith, there's a quote on our walls in our office saying, he's quoted as saying, the information about the package is as important as the package itself. So you kind of take a step back and kind of think about, what did he mean by that? Well, he knew that in order to compete with arguably what was a commodity in 20 years ago, of just delivering a package from point A to point B, in order for him to compete and charge twice as much, he knew that customers had anxiety about their packages actually arriving to their doorstep. And so the information about the package was communicated in a thoughtful and a seamless way to their customers. And that's how he beat USPS. That's how he was able to provide, like, the customer experience mattered so much to the consumers that they would pay more with the knowledge of knowing that they'd have confidence that they would know where their package was at any given moment. Apply that to your question of why is onboarding important? Why should we care? I think in a world where there's more and more software products, more and more products and services, there seems to be a company popping up every day. the customer experience becomes the primary differentiator. It becomes the reason of why people win. Salesforce did a study not too long ago, back in 2022, and they basically said 88% of customers care as much about the customer experience as they do about the product itself. And so you think about like why seldom do you go online and pay for something without knowing when you're going to get the product or service first. Like if they don't communicate that to you in the shopping cart experience, you automatically get apprehensive. You're like, well, I'm not going to buy this if I don't know when I'm going to get it. And I think software customers in the SaaS use case, or really in any use case that requires a hand-holding effort after the initial commitment is made, I think if you're going to provide a world-class customer experience that satisfies the demands of the modern day customer, you have to communicate the proverbial information about the package. Like you have to have a strategy to help them understand, hey, we're at point A right here. This is how we get to the finish line. This is what you're responsible for. This is what I'm responsible for. And then it looks like we have some third parties involved. Maybe there's some contractors or some system integrators, and this is what they're going to do. If you don't involve them in that transparent experiment, you're putting the renewal at risk, right? You're raising their anxiety levels. You're putting trust at risk. And we just did a study across 250,000 projects of like, hey, what are the common themes that our customers, like in any person that's onboarding a product or service, should be measuring? And there's some really cool learnings in that I'll kind of filter in some of your questions here, but I'll pause there. This is like me talking about one of my kids. I get super passionate about it, so I'll try to keep
I love it. The information piece is really interesting too, because what it implies is there's work to do in an onboarding, but there's also a communication channel that occurs there that you wouldn't have if you didn't have a formalized onboarding infrastructure, process, etc. And you know, your Fred Smith quote actually made me think about something that people, if you've ever been to Disneyland or Disney World or something like that, you know, they've been working forever and studying the idea of queuing, like people lining up and all the psychology of that. One of the things they discovered was people will actually be perfectly happy to stand in a line for a long time, but only if they know how long it is.
Yeah.
You know, you could say it's
so true.
You know, the experience of standing in line for 20 minutes is actually more upsetting if you don't know that it's 20 minutes than an hour if you knew it was an hour. And so that's what they've done. If you've been there, you know, they have these things that say you're 20 minutes from the end of the line, or you're 2 hours or something like that. But the whole point is that there's a psychology around expectations. And I love the way you brought that into the onboarding, but you also talked about the other dimension, which is there's stuff to do. Now, I actually want to stop on this for just a second, because how much stuff there is to do varies massively across different use cases and companies and products, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, people have asked me, well, okay, so the purpose of onboarding on some level is to make the changes necessary for the customer to get the benefits that the product supplies, right? Okay, great. Those changes have to happen. They can't be put off unless you're willing to put the results off, which is a bad idea. We'll talk about that later. But okay, so these changes have to be made. What about in a use case where little or no change has to take place, right? Very little, if any, change. Like, I don't know if this is the best example, but something like Slack, right? Now, people change their behavior when you implement Slack, but it's not a lot of work. It sort of just happens, right?
Yeah.
Right? A lot of it. And maybe that's not the best example, but at least it's on a spectrum. And now I can say, well, maybe what's over here on the other end of the spectrum is something like SAP, which takes years to implement, and everybody has to change everything you do.
Yeah.
Right? So how does onboarding relate to that spectrum, at least in your point of view?
So really quick, rewinding back to that Disneyland example, I think there's some learnings there. We have a stat. So I printed off, I have a presentation I'm giving at the GUIDex Pulse conference next month. And in preparation for that, we just did this big data study across these 250,000 projects. And a learning from that was projects with a forecasted end date. So in our system, we have the ability to turn on and off like a real-time algorithm that forecasts a project end date based on the velocity of how fast or slow things are happening in the project experience. It's like, you know, the Delta pilot gets on the loudspeaker and says, hey, we're 20 minutes late from pushing back from the gate, but don't worry, we'll be on time, we can fly faster, right? That comment alone puts customers at ease, and they know that I don't have to call my rides at the other end to let them know I know that I might be late. My bags are going to make my connection if I'm trying to catch another flight. So the fact that like Delta knows that they're late, but they can make up time, like that's half the battle. So our forecasted end date functionality does that, kind of throws bells and whistles up to help project managers know they need to fly faster. But in our study that we did, it said projects with this forecasted end date functionality turned on came in on time 87% of the time. So, and that was measured against what the original planned and end date was upon project creation. Projects with it turned off. So in your example of the Disneyland line, people get in line and maybe there's not an expectation set on how long they'll be in line for, 67% of the time on time. And so the knowledge of knowing, hey, what my original planned launch date was and how that changes over time helps customers know and understand like what the critical path looks like. And those projects, if you set that expectation up front and then update that expectation real time and benchmark it against the original expectation, across 250,000 projects in GUIDEcx, you'll deliver those projects on time 87% of the time, which is that.
So this is really interesting. Yeah, totally. Because the question I have, Peter, though, this is really good research. I love this. I want to dig on this. It's obvious that it's changing behavior. So back to the queuing at Disneyland, it's changing behavior in one very particular way that matters to them, which is that people don't exit the line. People stay in line. Is there a similar kind of psychological impact that's driving that significant improvement in outcomes that you think?
So so the next thing we did is says, okay, of those 87%, we then took out 27 customers that we were able to get to agree to participate in the study. And we said, hey, can we take that cohort of customers that were delivered on time within like their planned end date, their planned launch date, with the forecasted end date functionality turned on, and then do retention analysis after a year of the customer being on your product or service. And the retention amongst those customers across 27 clients, and I don't have the number of projects, but it has to be in the thousands. There's 98% logo retention after 1 year. So to your point about customers not exiting the line, if you can deliver a product or service, I call it time to initial value, right? Because you're always trying to get value month over month over month. But if you can deliver that project and get them to their aha moment, that time to initial value in the stated time, the effect that has in long-term retention is enormous. Like it's a huge lever in your ability to affect that long-term trajectory of what that customer experience is going to be. But I don't want to ignore your previous comment, like Slack, like complex use cases versus very simple use cases. One of our customers is GoTo or LogMeIn, is what they're previously known as. They run thousands of projects through our tool that take days, not weeks. And then they have their enterprise motion that take months, right, to onboard a client. And the difference between the two is like they have their freemium user. I'm oversimplifying their use case, but they have their kind of freemium motion like a Slack where I could just turn on the product. People could get immediate value out of it. And the handholding is very light, but customers still have an expectation and know where they're at in that process. And like, hey, what are the like simple change management procedures I should be following? Like how do I battle inertia in my organization? How do I educate managers on how to use Slack in the most effective way? What are common ways to engage people with channels? Like we're going through this right now with our Slack instance. We kind of it turned into like a town square where we had hundreds of channels and there was no organization to anything. And then we hired an employee from another company who like had really good proven processes around Slack, best practices. And we implemented those in this last couple of quarters. And it's literally increased our productivity 4x with how we're using Slack today versus how we're using it last year. And so just because a product is simple to onboard, it shouldn't negate all the best practices and the change management that needs to be measured in order to retain that customer for life. On the complexity side, that's when you get into like if SAP implementation, like now you're going to suck in metadata from all sorts of different systems to make a project manager's life easier, not having to chase information. We have this new recipe builder integration kind of framework that allows you to build integrations with pretty much any product or service with an API with no or low code. So as an example, like we use our Intercom, which is like our chat tool. We have a free trial experience. When those free trials convert into customers, we suck in a ton of metadata from Intercom that automatically posts to the GUIDEcx project. And it tells us how many web sessions that company's had, whether or not they completed tasks in the onboarding experience. So we have a project we run them through, how many attachments they've uploaded. So whether or not they've like engaged and uploaded their process. It shows us any NPS survey data that was submitted during the free trial experience. And it also shows us an overall health score. So we take signals on how many participants were there in the onboarding experience, how many times they've logged in, we kind of require, we think the holy grail of any project is to have three customer users, like participants in the experience, the check signer, the power user, the person like maybe it's the implementation manager that manages the team, and the individual contributor. So someone that like is at the level of like, they're going to be using this day to day for the actual intended function of the purpose. And I would say those are the three people that any project should have. Because, you know, we bought products and services in our company where like, I just got an invoice from a product we purchased. I don't know where we're at in the process. And I'm asked to approve this invoice. And I now have to go out to my customer success team and say, hey, like, are we getting value out of this tool? And we're fortunate because we're all in the office, but other companies are dispersed. And if you require a check signer or an approver to like go out and search for that, like you're putting that renewal at risk on step one. Right. So anyways, sorry.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah. And one of the things that again, back to your research that I think is really interesting is so, you know, here's your time to first value or something like that you said. I always say time to first results, same thing. We have research, which I think you've seen actually, that shows that customers who get to a measured value stay massively longer than customers who don't, like 6 times longer. Like it's a huge thing.
Even if they don't, like what I love about your study is even if they don't hit the measurement, right? Even if they don't satisfy like just the fact that they measure. I love that about your study.
Yeah. And for those who haven't seen it, the study shows that if you measure and it shows you got poor results, those customers will still stay more than twice as long. So it's this, there's something, and this goes back to your Fred Smith thing or the queuing at Disneyland thing. The point is there's a psychological dimension that's very material to long-term success here. And that is, I know where I'm at. I know what I have to do. I know when it will end. That kind of transparency, visibility is really important, because at least one theory that I have is that it is like the line at Disneyland, in that if you do those things, people don't exit the line. They don't get out of line. Well, what's the analogy for that in customer success? People bail. They bail earlier than we realize. In fact, time is way more sensitive than we realize. So we did a study recently with a client where we found, where we asked, does it matter, for instance, how quickly they get engaged into the solution, right? Whether they get open to it and start using it. And our results showed that it's quite astonishing. Customers who got in and were using it in the first 10 days had massively higher retention than those who didn't. In fact, it's better to look at the other way. If they didn't get in the first few days, they essentially all churned over the next, 12 to 24 months. So it's a really big deal. Time is of the essence. And one of the things I've noticed, and I think this is relevant to what you're saying, so I kind of want to put it to you, is that part of the reason time is so sensitive is because customers don't have an unlimited wellspring of energy and attention to put on it. Yeah. Right? There is a limit, and you're quickly burning through that patience, that available resource, whatever it is, the wherewithal to get to the end.
Yeah.
And so if you can buy a little bit more time with that transparency, that information and communication loop, all the better for outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah. The analogy that comes into my mind, or the common use case or experience that oftentimes is given, is we sign a deal, and I then pass that deal over to my implementation department, my onboarding department, whatever you call that department. And then an email goes out to the customer welcoming them with a litany of bullet points and tons of attachments. And then we wonder why they go quiet after that. So your comment about customers are, you have to manage their emotions just as much as managing their behavior. Feed them in bite-sized chunks. So I think it's important to understand why people don't engage and how that then extends the time of a project. One of the learnings we had on our study too, it's a really cool one. It's based on tasks completed, so customer-facing tasks in the project, and basically it's right here, on-time deliverables and tasks. So 83% of customer tasks. So our product has the ability to provide this portal or an email form or in text or what have you, for customers to complete their tasks that are assigned to them by a provider of a good or service that's the payer of GUIDEcx. 87% of the time, customers complete those tasks after their normal business hours. So it kind of tells you that your customers have a normal job that they're already doing. And when they take on your implementation, they're then taking on a second job. And you have to acknowledge that more work is being put on their plate. And more times than not, they don't have the time to do that work in the normal working hours of a day. And so what are you doing in order to enable them to do the work after hours when you're not available? Right? How can you provide them all the information that they need in order to complete a deliverable or a task or whatever you call it? So that they don't run into a stopgap, or they don't waste a day or two or three over a weekend just because they can't get a hold of you. 83% of GUIDEcx customer tasks are completed after normal business hours, which is a huge learning.
No kidding. That is super interesting. And it connects to this whole idea that there's a limited amount of time and resource they have. And it may be much more limited than we realize. So we have all the time in the world for them. If we're a very customer-centric company, we're willing to be there, right? Wait on them hand and foot. That's irrelevant. They don't have time to work with us on that level. And so we've got to figure out, A, how to do it very efficiently, but B, how to make it transparent enough that they don't get discouraged and give up. Because, well, here's another thing from our research. Everybody, I think, pretty much knows something that can be, in a sense, shocking when you see it in numbers.
Yeah.
But that is, more customers leave early than late. More customers fail early than fail 2 years down the road. Most customers that are going to fail in onboarding, essentially, because onboarding's the beginning. So that's interesting. Not only does that highlight why onboarding is important, but it also kind of begs another question that I want to put to you, which is, but if we have onboarding, why do customers fail? What goes wrong in onboarding that leads to so much customer failure at that phase?
So there's a video on the front page of our website by Harris Clark. He's our COO, that I love, because he centers more on the emotions of the customer that you're catering to are as important as just going through a checklist. And so what fails, and how do we kind of curb those emotions and help people maintain their trust in you, and reduce their anxiety, and also earn their loyalty? And like that first conversation, one of the reasons my background is like a group of climbers climbing Everest, is our brand is very much centered on like all the attributes of a guide in nature, like a mountain guide or a fishing guide or any physical guide. They're similar to, like, a good guide in nature is similar to a good guide in an implementation experience of any product or service. Like when I started this company shortly before I left my previous company, I hiked Machu Picchu, one of my bucket list items. I did the 4-day Inca Trail. And my guide, like we arrived in Cusco. We went over to his house before we knew the next morning we were going to go have a 3-hour drive to the trailhead and then start our 4-day journey. And he had this map that he showed us. And in that map, it detailed out what each of the 4 days would look like, how many peaks we'd summit, what we were going to eat every day, what we were going to see every day. He also got us excited about, within 3 hours of starting the trail, you're going to see this ruin and it's going to absolutely floor you. And he earned my trust in the first 20 minutes of dealing with that individual. And I don't think it's any different. Like the adage is, it takes time to build trust. I would holistically disagree with that. I think human nature is to trust at the service. Like, you have to break my trust before anything else, right? Like I kind of come into a process. Like, I just had this amazing 4-season experience in the sales cycle. I'm excited about the product or service. My emotions are high. My trust is broken when I fall into this trough of disillusionment, right? When I realize all of a sudden, like, I really bought Motel 6. And so it's kind of, how do we curb those, like, help people understand that, like, let's keep the momentum. Part of it is using data in a really efficient way. So whether that's metadata, in our case, we use Intercom to provide a ton of metadata about the actual customer that got across the finish line. So our implementation manager knows immediately, hey, am I dealing with an ultra engaged client, or do I need to provide the NICU experience? Like, do I need to, like, handhold aggressively? And we have 2 types of projects. Like, if there's a super engaged user in our free trial experience, and by the way, our sales engineers use GUIDecx too. But when that handoff occurs between the sales engineer team and the implementation manager, based on the onboarding health score that is calculated in this experience, they then get subscribed to either a light handholding experience in the implementation effort or a heavy handholding experience. So that's just using our resources more efficiently. We also pull in a ton of metadata from not only that free trial experience that we pull from Intercom, kind of the actual behavioral data, but we also pull information over from our CRM, and we also pull information over from our financial system. So every time, like, we send an invoice, our onboarding manager knows if that invoice is overdue. And that then also kind of is an indicator of what the health score of that customer is in the onboarding stage. And so using metadata, like data about the customer, not having, you think about all the customer experiences you probably have of, like, calling a Verizon, trying to set up a phone or some sort of service. You get passed from person to person. You got to repeat yourself over and over and over. Like, every time you repeat yourself, you lose confidence in the organization. And so just thinking about all the information that you collect from the customer throughout, that the holistic experience in the sales and how that filters over to their onboarding experience is really important. And just like one of the recipes in our integration structure that we built is when a customer is in the onboarding experience and they submit a ticket in Zendesk, if that Zendesk ticket then flows over to GUIDecx, the onboarding manager then gets notified that, hey, there's someone that, like, submitted the ticket that's part of this project. Here they are. This is the notes. And the onboarding manager then reaching out to that customer saying, hey, I heard you worked with Jen in our support department. It sounds like your problem was solved. Just want to make sure that all is well. That simple act alone, it's amazing how much, like, you're satisfying that, like, keeping those emotions high from the customer. Like, they're gaining so much confidence from you. And that's right. then going to provide more effort on their side. And one more thing I'd mention is so part of our study is the number of client participants invited to a project. And so customers, so let me pull this up so I get it right. our data shows that projects with 5 or more customer participants come in on time 91% of the time. If you have 2 or less people on the customer side, 61% of those projects come in on time. So you kind of extrapolate, well, what does that mean? Well, if you have multiple users invited to a project experience on the customer side, you're creating intrinsic accountability. So like me, like the product or service we bought, and I get an invoice, and I don't want to pay that invoice because I don't know whether or not we're getting value out of it. And I'm now required to go like search on whether or not we're getting value out of that. If I was part of the project experience, I would know whether or not, Elon from our team or Mark from our team or Allison from our team hadn't done what they asked them to do. and because Elon, Mark, or Allison know that I see what they haven't done and I'm getting notification of what they haven't done, like that creates intrinsic accountability. Like they know that, hey, I agreed to pay a lot of money for this product or service and they're not buying in, like a conversation is going to happen immediately. And so at a minimum, one of our OKRs as a company is to, we grade the percentage of projects that are run through GUIDEcx that have 3 or more participants. So we want, like, that's a behavior we really want to push, because 3, kind of what I mentioned earlier in the call, you have a check signer, you have a stakeholder, and you have an individual contributor. If you have at least 3, then you're kind of on the right track. Like you're not putting your project at risk. But if you have only 1, well, you're relying on 1 person on the customer side to keep things organized, to engage who like they think should be engaged. And you're putting your project at significant risk. And so that's like, once again, 91% on time if they're 5 or more. That was kind of an inflection point. Any more, you don't get a lot of value after that. Any less, it starts to dive off significantly. And there's strategies
I wonder if
to
this
optimize that, but we can talk about those later.
I wonder if that relates a little bit to the customer size problem, because our data and a lot of other people's data shows very small companies do worse. It's possible you have a client that only has 1 person to put on the project. It may be that the CEO and the head of and the chief power user and the ultimate end user are the same person. And so that definitely illustrates why it's so hard for them to get to success. Yeah.
There's one specific example of a customer we have that provides phones to like dental offices that need to be set up. And there's kind of a ERP solution that gets implemented. They don't control the phones. Like they don't send people on site to put that phone on. And so you might have a simple project with only 1 person on there, but you got to think like, well, how many other third parties might be involved in my success? And for them, a big linchpin was getting an IT person that was contracted out by the dental office to install the physical phone in the office itself. That person would oftentimes put the project at significant risk because there's no accountability to them. Like that person would throw the company that was providing the good or service under the bus, saying, no one reached out to me. I didn't know when to be there. And then the dental office would believe that and then blame the company, saying, you guys don't have your ducks in a row. And so I think we can't just let ourselves think that it's the number of customer participants. It's the number of total participants in a project. In my previous company, we dealt with ADP. That was like a big integrated partner of ours. And we paid ADP a lot of money to be a certified integrated partner. But we always got hung up because they wouldn't send the transactional data we needed in a timely manner. And our customer would blame us for their problems. And with a transparent like scoreboard view, like that clearly indicates this is when they were sent this is when it was expected, and this is why they're late. And then on a monthly basis, now I'd have information using an onboarding solution like GUIDEcx. We have a third-party performance report that kind of gauges, hey, the percentage of time I assign tasks to ADP or this IT phone contractor, what percentage of time do they deliver on time? And now you can start managing that relationship a lot easier. So, but I do subscribe to the fact that there's probably a smaller customer component to that. But there's also, those smaller customers often leverage outside parties help them in
Mhm.
these types of implementations, depending on what they're implementing.
It's a great point. It's a really great point. Thanks. Perfect. And that gets kind of at another thing, which is one of the things that we've found consistently. So what we know is that customers stay to get results, right? And that just begs the next question: why do some customers get results and others don't? And what we found is very consistently that the difference between successful customers and unsuccessful customers is that the customers who get results are the ones who change their behavior. They do something different. Now, there are technical things like we have to provision their system and set up their users and integrate with and all of those involve them, or most of them do. But there are also behaviors that are completely separate, right? So an example was, we had a client that was working in the dental industry, coincidentally, and their solution helped dentist offices avoid no-shows. But what they found was that in addition to using the solution, they got so much more value. They reduced that no-show rate so much more if they would also put a little poster on the wall that said, if you don't show up to your appointment, we'll fine you $25.
Yeah.
Now, this was a behavior, and the reason I point this out is this was a behavior that had nothing to do with implementing or using the technology. It was a completely different behavior.
Yeah.
I think of it as outside the system, right? So what I find is that that's a good example of a lot of behaviors that are essential for success. And many of those, if not all of them, have to be engaged at some point during the initial phase, call it onboarding.
Yeah.
And so what I'm wondering for you is, I love the whole transparency theme that you're talking about. And in a sense, there's a big part of it, you haven't used the word, but I will, accountability, right? So you guys are accountable to do the things you said you'd do, but also the client is accountable. And we have to tie that in to say, hey, look, if this is the results you want, you have to make this change. And I'm curious, how does that fit into all of this? How do you hold customers accountable, right? It's easy in some senses, it's a lot of work, but straightforward to hold ourselves accountable, to make our list of tasks, to not, blow it. It's harder to hold customers accountable.
Yeah, the two words that come to my mind as you're describing this example at the dentist office of them posting, sign, is change management. Like, it's not all about your product or service. You have to figure out where the aha moments are, where the best practices, what behavioral attributes that you want your best customers to exude. Once you find those things out, it's change management. It's like my Slack example earlier on in the call. We probably would have churned Slack. Like my CFO, every meeting I had with him last year was, hey, we could do the same thing through email. I don't get why we have other communication channels. And it'd be very frustrating to him. And he goes, and people are also texting each other. I don't get how this is different. Now that's not even uttered, right? Because we connect our status alerts to Slack. We have, our channel set up. We have like a good news hotline that, the whole purpose of the channel is to promote good news throughout the whole company. Like whenever a deal is sold, we have a best practices channel. Like it's helped our company sing the same tune. And not sound like a choir that's singing different songs, right? It's helped our messaging effort. I'm not like the biggest Slack advocate, but like the best practices that probably could be enabled with a lot of other solutions are why we will stay with Slack. And in order to find out those best practices, one of the, like, just speaking personally with GUIDEcx, we have the fortunate, I don't know if it's just the stars align in such a way for me where a bunch of my early employees were former they call them Domo sapiens, right? People from Domo that worked at a BI, business intelligence company. And that kind of instilled a level of discipline in our company to not rely on anecdotal data, right? And rely more so on solid behaviors that, represent stickiness and expansion within our customer base. For instance, one of our aha moments is when our customer's customer uploads an attachment. So that's not they complete a task, not they add a work note, but they upload an attachment. Like that then represents a level of stickiness long-term for the customer to for our GUIDEcx customers. And so that then becomes a North Star for our organization. Like our product team builds product around that behavior, to optimize that behavior. Our sales team sells to hey, this is how easily you can gather information from your customers. Our free trial experience is designed to get the customer to do just that. Our customer success team has a dashboard that's showing the percentage of their book of business that exudes that behavior on an ongoing basis. And so finding those North Stars for your organization are critical as a step one. And a step two is to identify a strategy to manage that change management process. And that's why, I don't buy the fact that, hey, if I'm a freemium product, I could just forget about change management. One of the things we're seeing in today's market is easy come, easy go, right? People that where it's very easy to sign up for a product or service, where that company just relied on that user's intuition to know how to use it effectively. Those are the first customers to leave. You're a vitamin to them. You're not a need to have. And so more and more companies are understanding that hey, the investment up front improves to provide dividends downstream. So yeah.
Well, but I think this is really important, because freemium's a part of, I think, a larger trend, and the buzzword lately has been product-led growth, which conceptually is a banger if you can get there, but there's a big hole there for a lot of companies, which is that assumes that the product itself can drive the kind of necessary behavior change to get results. But what if, and I said it varies along a spectrum, what if your product requires some significant amount of customer behavior change? I don't think PLG can work in that scenario, at least not without the assistance of being able to connect the dots for customers on why changes are important to their outcome, and then helping them to make those changes. And by the way, it's the customers who know the least about it, who need that help the most, and are also the most likely to fail and churn. So we all have customers who come ready to go. They know what they're doing, they've thought it through, they've got their metrics, they've got a plan, they're change management experts. And we just sit back and applaud, basically. And frankly, we learn from those customers. But most customers aren't like that.
Well, your early comment about sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, your early comment about customers, their behavior, their needs and their hopes and dreams evolve after the initial experience. And I kind of apply that in what you're saying right now is lots of times you fall into a trap where your customers, your early customers, start to give you immediate feedback on your product. They say, well, hey, you need your product to do X, Y, and Z. And when you fall into that trap of accommodating those things without understanding what they're trying to accomplish versus just taking the customer feedback, you stop being prescriptive. You start sounding like a car salesman and not like a doctor. And when you're in the provider seat, we call our customers providers, right? Providers of goods and services. You want to be very prescriptive along the way, and you can only be prescriptive if you know what the pains and ailments are. And then they'll continue to come to you if they see that, hey, that treatment that you prescribed to me, it worked. And so this is my next problem that I'm having. So
makes sense. Okay, so this is where I wanted to get to. I'm really excited about this because there's a lot of people listening or not who are going to hear this or see this, search it out, who have essentially some version of the following situation. Peter, I have very limited resources. We've only dabbled in onboarding, or what we have is very minimal because it's what we could afford, it's what we could do.
Yeah.
The question is, given the very real resource constraints that everybody operates under, what do you tell people where they should start today to look at? What are the first few things or couple things they should look at doing that would make the biggest difference in onboarding?
Yeah. So some blocking and tackling things that you can do, and then I'm going to be a little selfish and pitch what our kind of professional service model looks like, because we know that, right? People are resource constrained and they need help. And this is a paradigm shift for most companies. But blocking and tackling first. One is the more productized you can make your onboarding experience, the more measurable it'll be. And the more measurable it is, then the more optimizable it can become. And I say productized, meaning it's more repeatable you can make your experience. There's always some level of repetition that can be applied to any experience. You might think that, hey, my onboarding experience is variable. Every customer is different. Well, if every customer is different, I'm sure you can identify milestones that you can guide each of those customers through. And if you could just make it repetitive on the milestone level, then you can start measuring the time it takes for each milestone to get from point A to the finish line. When you start doing that, then you can start identifying how to optimize that. One of the challenges I had in my early companies is we just had a checklist of 120 items that we needed to go through for every customer. And we took all that on ourselves. And what inevitably happened is we had 40 project managers, and they all followed the same 120 checklist item, onboarding process, but they were all, offering 40 different customer experiences. They all chased information differently. They all asked customers to do things differently. Some used like spreadsheets to show progress. Some didn't. Some called rather than emailed. And so I said the second step is to look at your process and identify, hey, what can I pass over the fence to my customers? How can I enable my customers to do more on their side? Because people in the modern day customer wants to self-serve. They want to be enabled. And if you can enable them, then you're going to substantially reduce your time to value. And then the third item I'd mention is to identify the personas or the functions that you require on the customer side to be successful. So I say that by saying lots of times you fall in the trap of just saying, hey, we just need a power user on that side, and then we're going to leave it up to them to project manage and identify who is needed on the customer side for mutual success. Now, you should build your process in a way where you have kind of your welcome experience, and you can clearly identify and explain, hey, we need a data modeler, we need someone that can sign documents, and we need someone that can build processes, right? Those are the three functions that are required on your team. Who are those people? And that's how you get 5 customer participants on your project, right? Like you're now enabling them to project manage and kind of hand-holding them down the process of how to create that accountability. So those are kind of the first 3 things I'd mention. But obviously, technology can make all those things more efficient. And what I always say, like, we're number 1 in the onboarding space. We've been around the longest. We've created this category. But while we're a great technology company, I even consider ourselves a better consulting company. Like, our people have all experienced this pain, and we've seen thousands of projects go through our system, and there's just tons of learnings that we've derived from them, and those best practices. One of our pillars is our cultural pillars is wisdom, applied knowledge, and we rely on that wisdom pillar a lot to help our customers.
Makes sense. And when you talk about systematizing, productizing, mechanizing is a word I use sometimes, and people say, oh, but it's so different. Couple things that I say is, and maybe just to be controversial, I'll say, I reject that it's different every time. I actually don't agree. I don't think you can prove that, because here's why. Yes, there are differences in your customers. There's almost an infinite amount of differences between customers, but they're not all material to onboarding and to success. First of all, your product only does so many things.
Yeah.
And it produces an even smaller number of possible results. Yeah. And it turns out that to get those results, there's only so many things that are worth doing that customers need to do to achieve those results. So the reality is, when you've compressed it down to those things, here's what we do, here's the results we produce, and here's what customers have to do to achieve it, there isn't that much variety. There may still be some variety, and there frequently is, but it's not infinite, and it's not even large. And I think that's why I appreciate so much the idea of mechanizing or productizing the process. I agree with you. What we see repeatedly is that companies haven't taken the time to think through clearly the milestones, the particular processes, and how to do them repetitively. Yeah. But the other thing is, there are customers, and it's not a few, who really have no idea how to get to the end result. And so not only are you making it more consistent, the experience you're providing and its likelihood to produce the result, but you're giving something they didn't have. And this is where it comes to your consultant claim. I think there's a lot to that. But what I would say is that you have expertise. What's expertise? It's knowing clearly what customers have to do to achieve results. That's what expertise is the most valuable, and you know it. And the customers who most need that expertise are the ones who don't have it, who literally don't know how to get there, right? And they trust that you do. So it's really valuable from that perspective. I love it. That's all good. Okay, one last thing. You kind of implied this, but I want to just, in the last couple minutes here, what are the best metrics for customer onboarding? What should we be measuring, right? You've just given me a good sense of where to start on what to do. What should I measure?
Yeah, so there's 4 things that I believe should go into your onboarding health score. The number of client participants involved, identifying what percentage of the time customers complete deliverables within a stated time frame, project completion. Measuring, hey, did they come in within our expected timeline, or did they come in outside of that timeline, and why? And then 4, engagement. So we measure how many times they look at the portal. It's amazing. Like that was the last piece of data that I didn't share, but on average, if you provide the customer like a white labeled progress tracker, 2.7 times per week, customers will visit that tracker. Like, think about last time you ordered a Amazon package. You want to know when you're going to get it. And then app mentioning 4.7 times per week. So communicating with them in that portal. So measuring engagement. Those are the 4 items I would measure.
That's really good. And one of the things that you've said, which just made me think of another thing, which is, sometimes people ask me, can a customer come out of onboarding red, meaning at risk? Absolutely. That's the whole point of having a health score. If they couldn't come out red, then what's the point? What are you measuring?
And you can still save them. Like I share the analogy all the time. My 3rd daughter went to the NICU. And so you have all these babies that go through this process. They all kind of, the majority come out fine, and they thrive. And unfortunately, like, I was at a hospital that didn't have a level 2 NICU, that we needed to this machine to apply surfactant to her lungs, and they didn't have that machine. So she had to be life flighted to another hospital. Long story short, she was fine. But when I kind of started to understand that this hospital didn't have a NICU, didn't have a process to kind of handle my needs, I started losing trust really quickly, and panicking. And you think about your customers, when they kind of start having challenges, and they didn't, the failure to launch syndrome, they will panic if you don't have a process to handle their needs. So do you have a NICU? All right, that's another whole topic we can pontificate on. It's awesome.
Oh, I wish we had time. What we'll have to do is we'll have to do it again, Peter. This has been absolutely fantastic. I knew it would. I always love talking to you. Thank you for your time. Best of luck in the future, and let's find a time to do it again.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Greg, for all you do for the industry. You're a giant.
You bet. No problem. I love it. All right. Thanks, Peter. And thanks everyone who attended, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, great.